man. Go and move about. Me I tell the people them who they here. So he will present the maroon in Jamaica and sovereignty and the state. Interesting, right? Then we have Dr. Chenzira Davis Kahina, and she will present on sovereignty, sovereign resilience, the maroon legacy, and Afro Forges innovation in the Caribbean. So note it is within this Caribbean. And of course, on Zoom will be Dr. Knife, and he will present. And then we have Professor Diana Fox, also from University Mona, West Indies. So she will present the spirit of marriage, six pillars of the United Maroon Indigenous People. So those are the presenters for the afternoon. All right, so moderating this session will be Miss Lois Ten, and so she will lead you through this session. All right? Have a good time riding through the session.
Okay. I want to say a big Aquaba. Aquaba oh. Aquaba oh. All right, so I know we just had lunch, and I'm just going to ask the panelists to please come to the panelist table. Can you hear me online? Say yeah. Dr. Knife. Amanda.
Yay!
There you go.
Yes, we can hear you.
There you go. Again, I want to say a big welcome to everyone that has joined us via Zoom. Let me start the recording.
Recording in progress.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I want to say a big welcome to everyone is here and all the persons joining us via Zoom. And via Zoom, we have Amaya Chin, Dr. Knife, Dr. Richards was online earlier as well. I see Ian Moore. I see Auntie Fofe, and I'm seeing a Huawei P20 Pro. Welcome to you all. Again, I want to welcome our panelists that are in house. We have Mr. Devon Panton. He is an independent researcher. We have our Dr. Chenzira. She asked, speaks. That's who she's with. And we have, of course, she's a native. I cannot say anything else because it seems as if every other week Dr. Diana Fox is here in Charleston. So she's definitely a native. And she's with the University of the West Indies. And I want to say a warm welcome. All right. So, the topic for this session is land as an economic resource. And starting us off is Mr. Devon Panton. Please step to the podium.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Akwaba. Yeah. Yeah. All right. My presentation today really is, part two of an article that I wrote in 2019 that was printed in that year's magazine. That article was entitled Maroons in Jamaica, Sovereignty and Maroons in Jamaica, Sovereignty, Land Ownership and Peace. This current presentation was written for the same magazine in 2020. I don't quite remember what happened, why it wasn't published then, but this one is entitled Maroons of Jamaica, Sovereignty and the State. Now, this presentation is more a discussion type thing. I've been looking at a couple of considerations that need to be taken into account when we start talking about sovereignty. If they have not already been discussed, they need to at least be added to the discussion. All right. Now, former United Nations Secretary General, the late Kofi Annan, speaking from a UN perspective, spoke of states as instruments at the service of the peoples and of individual sovereignty as a fundamental freedom of each individual enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and subsequent international treaties. Now, based on Jamaican law, I think it is fair and safe to say that all Jamaican citizens, inclusive of the Maroons, enjoy individual sovereignty as dictated by the above-mentioned charter. And I chose to say inclusive of the Maroons to allow for some separation. Maroons, Jamaica, that really is what we're aspiring towards. The idea of Maroon communities gaining statehood has been one of those topics that is forever present, but the intensity varies with what is happening in the larger Jamaican society. There are times when the argument gets more vociferous, more out there, and there are other times when you don't really hear much about it. Now, Rosalind Cohen, in her journal article entitled The Concept of Statehood in the United Nations Practice, advises that in order for a territory to gain statehood by the United Nations, there are certain criteria that must be met. She spoke of four. Number one, permanent population. Number two, defined territory. Number three, stable and effective government. Number four, independence. I think we can safely rule out numbers one and two. Permanent population, defined territory. Those are met by all five Maroon communities in Jamaica. There are five, and all five have permanent population. People live there right around the year. They are defined communities. Although I think Professor Shepard had said that there's something to do with the lines that need to be brightened. Anyway, now in terms of stable and effective government, the Global Policy Forum posits that a state is the means of rule over a defined territory. Closer, okay. All right. Hello, persons online, are you hearing?
Yes, we're hearing.
Who's that, Dr. Knife? All right.
Yeah.
What do I start over? All right. I just was speaking of Rosalind Cohen in her journal article entitled The Concept of Statehood in United Nations Practice. And she advised that in order for territory to be recognized by the United Nations as a state, there are certain criteria that must be met. She mentioned four. Number one, permanent population. Number two, defined territory. Number three, stable and effective government. Number four, independence. And as I had said also, that I think we can safely rule out numbers one and two, permanent population and defined territory, because I certainly feel, and I'm sure you all agree, that all five Maroon communities in Jamaica meets this requirement, okay? Now, in terms of number three, stable and effective government, the Global Policy Forum posits that a state is the means of rule over a defined territory and that it is comprised of an executive, a bureaucracy, courts, and other institutions. We will come to the other institution not too long from now. But they go on to say, above all, a state levies taxes, operates a military and police force. Now, in terms of organization of the various Maroon communities, each community is headed by a colonel or a chief. The title depends on the individual, I believe, who has been duly elected by that community and is assisted by a group of elders or council of elders and, healers, as the case may be. Now, Maroon communities operate under the guidance of the elected colonel, and annual festivals are held by each community in celebration of past Maroon victories and commemoration of exalted Maroon leaders such as Nani, Kojo, Kwao, and other respected and revered ancestors. The government normally assists, normally is represented, or normally participates through the attendance of these funerals of the particular minister or some executive from the particular ministry who is charged with bringing greetings and good wishes to the particular community on behalf of the government of Jamaica. All right? That's generally the organization. Regarding executive and bureaucracy, traditionally, Maroons are very secretive about their internal affairs, and they have maintained their own ways of dealing with issues, whatever issues that arise within their community, through discussions and various rituals. Well, we're not going to go into that too much. Now, in terms of finances, some years ago, a Maroon community actually took steps to establish its own central bank. It appointed a minister of finance. It established its own currency, then referred to as the Lumi, and had even commenced printing samples of the currency banknotes. The value of the Lumi was said to have been asset backed by the sun, with each note being underwritten by the value of 100 kilowatt hours. And the general idea was that sunlight would be converted to electricity and sold back to the local company, meaning the JPSCO. And the value of 100 kilowatt hours would be used as a base value for one of the lumes. That was my understanding of it. Now, this idea in and of itself is not unworkable. However, the kind of outlay that it will require to get it to a feasible stage, to sell back amount to the JPS that will be able to run the community would be tremendous. It would require probably assistance from the United Nations, USAID, maybe the European Union. Now, in terms of taxes, I am not aware of any taxes being levied by any of the Maroon communities. In terms of a military and or police, within each community, selected able-bodied men and women form ceremonial warrior groups who participate in festivals and who may from time to time be required to carry out actions geared at maintaining peace, harmony, and security. So while it's not a military or a police force, I think we can say that they more or less have that sort of role covered. Now, independence also poses a hurdle. All right? Rosalind Cohen went on in the same journal article to advise that traditional international law has long demanded that before a territory can be acknowledged as a state, it must possess independence and sovereignty. One definition of independence is freedom from being governed or ruled by another country. Over the years, there have been many discussions amongst the Maroons themselves as to whether they should participate in the Jamaican general elections. This is based on the idea that, there are some members who are of the view that they are residing in their own sovereign nation. Now, in my mind, nothing is wrong with that. However, if we were to coldly and dispassionately look at everything, one would quickly see that there are a number of issues that need to be addressed. In terms of, these are issues pertaining to viability and long term sustainability, which need to be addressed and more so remedied immediately. Maroon communities currently function as semi autonomous communities. However, in terms of legally registered births, deaths, and marriages, etc., these are all recorded or handled by the Registrar General's Department, which is a government of Jamaica agency. All right. Additionally, all utilities, general amenities, roads, pipe, water, electricity, telecommunications, radio, television, etc., are provided by companies that are contracted by government of Jamaica agencies. So too are the schools. The schools are administered by the Ministry of Education. This is a government of Jamaica agency. There's no getting away from this. And there are others too. In June of 1989, the International Labour Organization adopted Convention number 169. And I think Professor Shepard may have touched on this. It has to do with the indigenous and tribal people to facilitate development of dialogue between the country's government and the indigenous peoples who live in that country. Its central aim is to protect the human rights of indigenous people and acknowledge the aspiration of these peoples to exercise control over their own institutions, ways of life, economic development, and to maintain and develop their identities, language, and religion within the framework of the states in which they live. However, based on the information on that very website, the International Labour Organization, that is, only 23 countries have ratified the Indigenous Tribal Peoples Convention, and I checked this quite recently. Only 23 countries. Please don't ask me if Jamaica is one of them. There are currently no easy answers. There were none in the past. There are none now, and there will be none in the future. However, Kasik had mentioned a type of violence where someone learns from a local healer, puts it in a paper, and doesn't give that person credit as being the source of the information. But I'm going to introduce you to another kind of violence. The violence that is created and maintained once there's a gap between anticipated or desired rights and actual rights. People want sovereignty. They want to be recognized as a sovereign state, but they are not. That gap that exists there, that is where violence is created, a type of violence. Now, I'm not talking about warfare or revolution, all right? A type of violence is created right there. And it stays there and it smolders. That is why I said earlier that the agitation for separation, the agitation for sovereignty, it bubbles to the surface every now and again, depending on what is happening in the larger society. All right? Now, I am saying agitate, but we have to be pragmatic. It has to be organized. There are a number of other issues that I did not touch on. I was told this is a 15-minute presentation. There are a number of other issues that I did not touch on, but we have to think about all of them. What if, for whatever reason, the government was to say, all right, as of tomorrow, you're a sovereign state, what would happen then? Are we prepared to take charge of the responsibilities that I have spoken about a while ago? I suspect the answer is no. I think Gamma G mentioned in Suriname, some of the Maroons were able to trace their lineage because they have maintained records. And she did say, and this is my findings too, that this is not taking place in Jamaica. But it's not just about the history and the ancestry. It's about births, deaths, marriage within the community, education for the children, potable water, electricity, all of that. all of the general amenities that we all take for granted, myself included. As a sovereign state, this head of that state or those states would now need to be able to decide how his or her country is going to provide these for itself. And in closing, I say, like Gamaji, I'm also proud of my ancestry. My ancestry comes from a place that we now know as Flagstaff Maroons, the Trelawney St. James border. This is why I dress like this. I am a Maroon, and I'm proud of it. All right, thank you very much. I suspect there will be no questions, right?
Do not move. I want to say a big medasi.
That's it.
So, Doctor, I'm sorry, I keep.
Yes.
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 Mr. Panton.
The colonel mistaken, and let me publicly state this because I will get in problems with my friends at UAE. They will not let me live it down. I am not Dr. Panton. I hope to defend later this year, but right now I am just Devon is fine. The Mr. Panton is not necessary.
Okay, Devon.
Yes, please.
Thank you so very much for that presentation. We gave us insight on the topic, and I want to find out from everyone here as well as the persons that are online, do we have any questions for the presenter?
I take it the answer is no, right?
Not yet.
For me?
Do we have any questions from anyone online?
Okay, that's good.
That's very
All
good.
right, thank you.
No, don't move. Don't.
Whoa. Can we taking a picture just like that?
No, that's she. You have to let the sheep speak.
Have you the
Yeah.
Okay.
The black people don't like walking.
Okay.
They must see our anger and every emotion about it.
Okay, okay. That
Guess
is?
what? The battery is
Battery's dead. Yeah, right.
Okay, thank you so very much. All right, so we are down to our next presenter. It is Dr. Chenzira. I want to welcome you to the podium. She is with Ask Speak, and she will speak on sovereign resilience, the Maroon legacy, and Afrofuturist innovations in the Caribbean. Go ahead.
Give thanks, give thanks.
But
I'm going to start a little different because we are here for an academic panel. However, I'm very animated, so I want to make sure that I start like that. Bayete! Can you do that? You ready? Bayete. Let's try it again. Bayete. All I'm saying is royal greetings. So that way we're seeing one another in our regal space, right? Because we're going to be talking about a few things that can become a little difficult to talk about, a little challenging, a little challenging. Sometimes it'll come across that I am clearly, unapologetically an ancestral, indigenous, native, original African. So when I speak of marronage, I'm speaking of it in the context of being first, being part of the indigeneity that we speak about in these spaces called the Americas, but more importantly, always recognizing sovereign resilience. So the term resilience has become like a just overrated, right? Persons use that term resilience as if it has really no meaning. Yeah? But ultimately, when we speak of sovereign resilience, we're speaking of, and maybe we need to have that conversation. I'm timing myself. 2:30. Okay, got claro. Because I can get really excited here. When we say we're sovereign, that means we're addressing all things dealing with our culture, our history, our heritage, our traditions, our economics, our jurisprudence law, education, and health and wellness. Everything from the body politic, economic, social, spiritual, everything. Environmental, like climate change can't happen without sovereign people being at the center. Because if we didn't understand sustainability, there would be no earth. You understand what I'm saying? Okay, I just want to make sure I come back to that there. All righty, so I feel it's really important, and that's how come I said, let me put my notes together. I had these really wonderful slides, but I'm going to pause on that, and I'll just encourage people. You can find Asked Speaks on YouTube, and that way you can look at all of the videos and all of the images at your leisure. But ultimately, I'd like to highlight that when we speak of this sovereign resilience in the context of a maroon legacy and an Afrofuturist, so I need to explain that because someone asked me outside, what does this mean? What? Afro? So I want to explain. People are customarily engaged in Afrofuturism. And they're speaking of that, usually they're speaking of it from a place of sci-fi. So how many people ever watch Star Wars or Star Trek? I know I'm showing my hand here, right? Showing some of the age, right? But we watch these things in terms of futuristic, everything look like dead. There's no trees. The people act like cyborg and it's all this kind of energy. So that's what they speak of when they speak of futurism. Yeah. When they speak of Afrofuturism, they actually tried to say that this concept started in the 1990s in terms of research, when in actuality, and we're going to go back far, anyone that's identifying resilience, cool. And we're going to have an infomercial. I'm going to close my laptop, and the scholar, Dr. Knife, who has been online for a while, has requested to come forward. So just remember where I started. I won't lose my time, right? I'm not going to lose my 3 minutes? Okay, fine. Thank you. There we go. So in a moment, you ready? We're welcoming Dr. Knife. Dr. Knife, I hope you know it's only love alone, you know. Only love alone. Respect. Okay, give thanks.
Okay, I most sincerely apologize. Dr. Knife, can you say hey?
Yeah, man, can hear you, man.
Okay, so turn your camera on. I just saw your message. My apologies. And Dr. Chenzira was very, very gracious, and she's giving you her spot. Take it away.
Okay, well, let I also apologize for this, but I'm actually in the next country doing some research right now, seeing, so the time difference. But let me start by saying that land stop make. Mean there's no more land being made unless it is coming through volcanoes. And we have seen where they have made a place in Dubai. And we have seen what has happened to Dubai in most recent times in terms of the flooding of that area. You know, naturally lands are designed where rivers run to the sea. And so when it rains, the water will run to the sea. In Dubai, where they create that land, they have nowhere for the water to run, so it flood out. What's the point I'm making? When the NI people were fighting, they were fighting primarily for land, which is the main and probably the only source of real wealth. Then people ask about land and economics. Those things are married. You don't get rich and generate wealth for your country by some hypothetical thing. It has to be something which is real. See? I mean, that land is not just earth, it is also water. As much recognize now how important those two things actually are. And from the land and the water, depending on where you are, the other valuable thing is also air. Now, if we look at what is happening now in the earth, as it relates to things like climate change, then we'll recognize how valuable lands are that the Maroons actually have. Because the lands of the Maroons, a lot of it is primarily in the mountain. And so when you think about climate change and recognize that more than 85% of all the populations in the island states actually live on the coastal areas, it means that those people places are at risk. And the most secure lands tend to be the ones that are controlled by the Maroons. You not only have access to land, but you have also access to water. And you check it and find that in Jamaica, I mean the territories, bottled water is either the same price as or more expensive than petroleum. So look at retail bottled water that you buy from someone in the street is actually the same price as or more expensive than petroleum that you put in your vehicle. Additionally, you'll find that majority of the wars in the world are being fought not over oil, which is something that can replace, but over water. And we know that our lands in the mountains are the source for all the water as well. So when you start to think about it now, you realize that the real source of wealth, not only now but in the future, is going to be water. And it's going to be found in the lands. You also find that the United Nations also argues that because of climate change, the next set of wars in the future are going to be based on migration. Again, people moving to other places to try to get the land that they consider to be safe. So this thing in the land is not a joke thing. See, it's about having papers and documentation for land. All of the livelihoods are linked into land and associated with water. So the question is, how do we meaningfully transform this resource that we have into a basis for wealth creation? If you talk about wealth creation, you have to look at where the avenues are. The big concern now is about food sovereignty, not just food security, where people can get access to food. No, access to food means you can probably import food. And that don't mean it's good food they import. Because we live in a country where bad food kill more people than gunshot, you know. Majority of the things that kill Jamaican people are related to imported bad food or related to the lifestyle illnesses, whether it be diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, what we call non-communicable diseases. Those are all related to food, and those are all related to food that we don't really necessarily grow and plant for ourselves. But we are saying we need to have control over the food, not just access to food. Why is it that we need to have control over the food? And the food comes, the first source of all food is dirt. We know that. Dirt in itself have all the minerals that you need for your body. The next place you'll find most of those minerals will be in the sea and in the water as well, in things like spring water as well. But it's a dirt. And we are finding that they're arguing that a lot of the food that people are consuming, the nutrient density is very, very low. Which means it's a pretty dense food. It looks good, it might even taste good, but it is not that good because it don't have any nutrients that you need. The vitamins and the minerals that you need, you'll not be finding in those food. So if you talk about food and health sovereignty, you must be planting your own food. Now, I'll say argue that only when our country has established a solid basis for its agriculture sector that we can look towards the future with confidence. And for the Caribbean and Jamaica in particular, this is extremely important. We live in a country where we have more than 40% of all food produced are wasted. And the traditional long-term trees, most of those are wasted, probably 80%. Yes? But yet still we import our 1.3 billion US dollar worth of food. Over 1.3 billion US dollar worth of food. So you ask yourself, how is that the people of the land are the people who are poorest? Because in Jamaica, the data actually shows that the highest incidence of poverty, which is in quintile 5, tends to be in rural areas, in households that are headed by women, single-parent households. So how comes land is the source of all the wealth? It's also the source for good nutrition. And the people of the land are the people who are poorest and the people who are more sick. So the man who control the land, sell the mango and the fruits, and buy bread for go dead. You can't sell good food for go buy food, bad food. It don't make sense. So it means our brothers and sisters who are part of Maroon communities need to develop a serious strategy around food, health, and wealth sovereignty. You can't have food security and health security and wealth security without controlling those things in a meaningful way. And when you think about the strategic framework, You have to think about how you feed the local market space, where feed your community first and foremost. Because remember, when the food nutrient density is low, your children might be eating those food but still become malnourished. And if you're malnourished, it impacts their brain development, it retards your brain development, and therefore them can't be learning properly in school. Meaning if you're not eating properly, a lot of your other senses start to have problems. If you don't have enough vitamin A, your eyes might start to go bad. Your other elements where is causing a significant problem amongst youth. A lot of youth have type 2 diabetes. So they're really having some very serious challenges. And with the climate change, this thing is going to get worse. It's going to get worse. And remember that increase in temperature worsen all lifestyle illnesses. So if I say cardiovascular disease are going to increase, and the severity of the attacks are going to get worse, more people are actually getting strokes. People who are diabetic are going to get dehydrated, and problems are going to get worse. High blood pressure is going to get worse as well. So this thing of access to land and access to proper food is more important than we can even begin to start imagine. And therefore, people who control significant amounts of land truly have control over their own destiny. But we know in the abundance of water, the food is thirsty, because it makes no sense. You have all these access to these resources, but you're not using them in any meaningful way. I might sound away, but we have these lands for hundreds of years, and we're not very wealthy communities, which means that we have undeveloped resources within our surroundings. Yes? So the land is around you. We don't have any nutraceutical and functional food businesses where we take the actives out of the plants. There's a $240 billion industry. So we think about, we're stories about nanny of the maroon. Oh no, nanny of the maroon use spirit weed. On a particular day, I could allow her to disappear. But spirit weed have so many other functions, which are health benefits. We just need to take the active out of the plant and put it into some active by itself. All these different things that we call herb or we call bush. The industry is 240 billion. Remember, we have the indigenous knowledge of what these things are used for, So all I need to do is to partner with institutions that can take the actives out of these plants and put them into a merchandise form and sell them. We don't even start to talk about ganja, because we know what ganja is. I don't see any maroon community with any thriving ganja business or a large number of ganja-related products coming out of those things. I'm not seeing we're making any combination of ganja and other herb to make products as well. All I'm saying is that these opportunities are there. We're in a position where we can get things done, but it takes proper planning. Remember when people were fighting for freedom, it wasn't a fight for us one day. Some wars are last up to 80 years. So it will be a long-term strategic planning focus. Are we prepared to do that? We're having these functions, which I think is very useful because a lot of information is being shared. But post the function, we have to look at how we move from the idea to the actual development and implementation of these ideas. Discussions surrounding reparation and all those things when people are asking money. Money is an illusion, man. And we know this by economics. Fiat money means that the face value of that currency is far, 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 far more than the intrinsic value. If you could use that money. So you know that fiat money is an illusion. You have to talk about full-bodied money. Something like gold, where the intrinsic value is equal to the face value. But which part gold come from? It's out of the dirt. The dirt is the source of all the wealth. If you don't control the dirt that you live on, you don't control any real wealth. So the idea is to convert that which is in the dirt into meaningful wealth. And the best way to do that, the easiest way to do that, is to start to look at food production. I mean real good food now. Because the world is in crisis. People are saying we need all things to be natural products. Everything has to be natural. So it's not just food, but you have to talk about all fiber. Right now, people are saying that microplastics are are everywhere in people's organs and in people's systems. So they need to stop using polyester materials. So there's going to be an increase in demand for the use of things like linen and hemp. And of course, cotton as well. But cotton is a thing that uses a lot of poisons. But linen and hemp are going to be in high demand. Are we planning to look at alternative building materials as well? Because climate change means that they need breathable materials. The roofs have to be higher, the designs of buildings have to be different. But what are the breathable materials? Are you going to look at hemp and hempcrete? Jamaica might be a strange place to talk about hemp because you know about the pollination. And so hemp might not necessarily be the best option for us. But I'm still saying to you that when you think about it in the broader scheme of things, those people who control land will control a lot of wealth creation. If you're not using concrete, you're using lumber. Are we planting lumbers for housing and other kinds of construction? Are we looking at things like teak, which is going to be used in the shipping industry because Jamaica is going to be a hub? There are so many opportunities out there, for us to utilize land to do what we have to do. And I'm just, finally, I want to say, we need to take a couple of pages out of the book of our ancestors, who initially said them fighting for freedom. And what they do is go to the place where they find the abundance of resources, which is in the mountain. You have food and you have water. And people shed them blood to get these lands and to maintain these lands. And I'm saying to you, be very careful, because right now, given that there's going to be this focus on Jamaica for the hub, there's going to be significant increases in demand for land generally in Jamaica. Given the worsening conditions of climate change, those who control the lands in the West are the ones who are going to be targeted by the state to take the lands that they have. And I'm saying that without any question in my mind that that is what is going to happen. So the Maroon communities need to prepare themselves for a battle with the state. Because 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now, most of the lands on the coastal plains might not exist. And so people are going to challenge the Maroons for the lands that they actually have. Are we prepared to defend those lands as our ancestors have defended those lands? But the best way to defend land is to put it under some form of production. So I leave by saying, either we're farming food or we're farming fools. See? And so we need to be clear as our ancestors were. And my favorite person was the nanny of the Maroon. And what I learned from the nanny of the Maroon is that the people who win a war don't sign peace treaty. Only the man who lose the war want to sign the peace treaty. So I'm just reminding you as people of land, we're not prepared to sign no treaty with anybody over the land. We must maintain our lands, develop the lands, and create sustainable forms of production with the lands that we actually have. So give thanks.
What a powerful message. Dr. Knife, I can feel your power coming right through from Barbados. I tell you, those are very, very important message. It is important that, what did you say? Either we're farming food or we're farming fools. And that is the big question. What are we going to do?
You're not officer. Shoot.
Go ahead, Auntie Fofe. Don't answer it. Don't answer it. Auntie Fofe.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I was saying that is such a powerful presentation. I hope everybody clean out their ears well this morning and I listen.
All right. And that is it.
Yeah, I mean, this is just so... I have no words. Thank you, my brother.
Yeah, give thanks. And I must apologize to the team because I actually have to run to go and conduct an interview for this research, and this is not my approach. Let me just do something and leave and things,
Okay.
But,
do you have time for a quick question? One quick question.
Ancestors walk with you.
Give thanks.
All right. He's gone.
Dr. Knife? He's gone. Yeah. Well, uh, what I just wanted was to say, it was such a powerful statement. And in my last book that I wrote, I mentioned that the visible Earth is only 29% of all Earth on planet Earth. 71% of Earth is underwater. So with only 29% of visible Earth, we have to be very careful how we use it. And a scientist was asking, what is the cure to climate change? And a young lady answered and said, nature took care of that. It's called trees. Okay? And because of that, the 7 Mile beach in the grill have erosion because we took out all the trees from the beaches and so forth. So this is very important that we only have 29% of visibly land, and we have to be careful with deforestation and all of that taking place, and how we build it and use the 29%. So the Maroons have a portion of that 29%. Don't give it up. It's more valuable than any money, anything they can give you. That percentage, they must fight for it and maintain it in the possession.
All right. And I can say we have prime lands. And exactly that is what it is. And also, by extension, Dr. Knife did tell us, in not these words, but guys, listen out. There's a revolution coming.
I give thanks. There is a revolution. It's the Save Soil revolution, and it was pioneered by Sadhguru Jagi out of India. And we have piggybacked on that and created Save Soil Jamaica. They're saying 97% of that soil we use for antibiotics and for food. Yeah, so if we don't save the soil, nurture it, we are not going to be able to survive from the soil. And then reminds us 2.5 feet of topsoil is what we live on. We've got to take care of the soil. We have no choice.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. Dr. Knife, thank you. And we are wheeling and coming back. And it is now none other than Dr. Chenzira. It's your turn.
One more time. We're going to try it again. We're going to try it again. We're going to try it again. I think we already know what she's going to start with, right? 1, 2, 3. Bayete. Did you see that? Okay. We're just saying royal greetings. And I would definitely like to give my thanks and loving, respectful, honorable, loyal greetings to complement what is being done here for the 16th annual Charlestown Maroon Conference, this day of the 21st of June, 2024. And I'd like to highlight and just take a moment for everybody to just, I know we've had lunch and we've seen a lot of activities, we've listened to a lot, but if we could just take a moment and take a very deep breath together and hold that breath with sacred intentionality. So when we speak of sovereign resilience, we're speaking of it in a place that's medicinal, healing, powerful, and clearly unapologetic. Let that breath out. So I'm starting from, I know everyone remembered all the things I said earlier, so I don't have to go through that, but I think it's important to know some of the drive of why when we speak of an academic panel or academic presentations, sometimes we get into a space of feeling that there is a certain sovereignty inside of even that academic space. I think I have to bring this up. Is that better? Okay, give thanks. And for me, it sounds loud. And it's really important that we have a sense of humility and a sense of respect for the stewards, the caretakers, what we refer to as Sangoma, those persons that engage in priestly rebirthing and healing and delivery of the sciences, the arts that govern our universe, and that when we speak of maroons in the space of the Caribbean, and that's why for myself, I'm very grateful that there's been a clarity of information shared that is specific to Jamaica. You know, you've had the word sound power coming from the Taino, as well as those that, am I better now? Better now? Okay, give thanks. Um, those that are very comfortable in that blended African indigenous identity. It's very important that we highlight some of the following. So, part of this presentation has been designed to speak to what does it mean to be sovereign and what does that entail? How do we speak of resilience? And when we say resilience, not just, oh, the people are resilient because they survived, but how do we thrive? How do we maintain a certain prosperousness? How do you strengthen our community so it's dynamic enough to endure centuries, now millennia, of struggle and more struggle over ancestral lands, rights, identity, preservation of our indigenous identities, resistance against enslavement, colonial oppression, and much more? How do you handle those social injustices and then move in the future? Where I had paused before was where we were talking about that intersectionality of maroon culture and heritage and how that connects to Afra. You'll notice AFRA, not AFRO. I'm not dealing with the hairstyle, no, right? We're talking about Afra, the soul and the flesh of light. I need to make sure that I express that. And in terms of futurist technologies, like how do we begin to transform how we are presented in film? How do we transform how we are presented in media? How do we shift from what the social media structure has attempted to do to make us invisible, to make us non present, to make us seem like it's only when there's an act of violence or someone gets incarcerated that that becomes the news, instead of when our youth excel academically, when our youth excel in terms of different activities that they're involved in, when our elders actually live to be centenarians. And I pause there because I could not come before you in this space of Charlestown, Asafu Yard, had I not touched the feet of my 101-year-old mother before I came, because I have to ask Eulalie Davis Bernice Thomas's permission before I do these types of things. Even if she doesn't agree with every way that I do it, but she could still reason with me and give me guidance in that regard. So just keep her in that space of prayer, as well as the other centenarians, of which I have been reading. There are many here in Jamaica. So when we talk about this Afro-futurist space, we're talking about a new way of how we engage with sustainability. How do we present heritage? How do we present culture? How do we respect the arts and sciences that govern the entire womb-niverse? I didn't say universe. I'm putting the womb at the center of what we speak of when we're speaking of our ancestral, indigenous, native, original legacy as maroons. And maroons is that term that we're using in very interchangeably many times when we speak of indigeneity. When we're speaking of that which is indigenous, we're speaking of that which is the original. We can say first, but I like not to get into the ordination, because our civilizations as humans have actually had a rippling effect in the entire earth. So there were things happening in West Papua New Guinea that we've overlooked. There's things that happen in Australia that affect us. People that will look just like each and every one of us in this room, speaking a different language. There are persons that have the same narrative when we talk about the Maroons and indigeneity and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We've already heard of Suriname, but we also need to speak of quote unquote Guyana, French Guiana, Guyana, English speaking, right? Well, definitely seeing the Virgin Islands, like part of what I will share, and I encourage persons, again, look at AST, AST Speaks, and there's a people do not even recognize that there were ruins all through the 48 contiguous US, as well as other parts of the Caribbean, Central and South America. No African indigenous person that was enslaved or forced to be held down ever didn't run away. Everybody ran away. We need to recognize that whether they ran away physically, whether they ran away mentally, and definitely run away spiritually. That's why we have all these songs and we sing and dance until we can be completely released. We can physically be in an enslavement space, but we will spiritually be in a totally different liberated space. The fact that we're still having these conversations around the diversification of institutions that don't wish for us to learn this. There is no reason that we have various, what is it, Black studies, Caribbean studies, global African studies programs, and we still are fighting to tell our story, to tell our narrative, to tell our truth. There's no reason whatsoever. So when we speak of this Afro-futurist space, what will the next film look like? Why are all of these futuristic films making it look like very pessimistic? There's no life. All the humans become cyborg. AI gonna run the earth. If that was the case, none of us here would be able to hold strong. So I'm asking us to say that when we speak of the future, we have to make sure we place ourselves front and center, unapologetically. We don't have to, when I say blended interests, it's not to say that we do not engage in those common generalizations of speaking of the West. Because when many of us speak of the West or the East, many times when we speak of Africa, people don't want to be called even African. In this space, it's a blessing, and I feel that there. But some places you go and you say, "My son, I'm not an African, I's black, I's West Indian, I's a Negro, I's colored, I's BIPOC." All of these other terms for how we define ourselves. So in this African futurist space, this is our opportunity to rewrite the narratives that are done so that our voice, our space, our presence is front and center. I'm going to keep saying that again. So there we talk about sustainability. Another part of this presentation, because this is part of a longer standing presentation that's linked to ancestral sacred traditions. So when you hear of Ast Speaks, yes, we're speaking of Ast as the divine mother, yeah? And some people like to say Egypt, and I always say we did not gyp anybody in anything. So it's very important to use ancestral ancient Africans. Nubia, New Kushia, New Heritage Legacy. So for short, we say Ankh Legacy because we're talking about the eternity, the liberty of how we engage in our historical, scientific, Afrocentric methods of how we communicate. How do we speak about revolutionary uprisings? How we're looking for more involvement in our work. How do you speak of decolonization, but you're using a colonial model to decolonize? That's not our future. We have to establish our own framework. So whether it means to look at the work of great ones, ancestors like Dr. Yosef Ben Yakanan, most people remember him as Dr. Ben, who was riding donkey in Egypt, going from temple to temple to temple to temple, translating what was in these temples in the 1930s. And persons forgot he lived to be more than 95 years. So he was teaching this. He was an African futurist back in the day. We have persons that led various revolutions, whether we speak of the Honorable Thomas Sankara, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Dr. Julius Nyerere, and we can go on with this list. When we speak of Naganani, many persons will speak of her as Nana, as an ancestral warrior queen that was able to do things here in Jamaica that most persons still can't do. We're still not taking it to the level like she took it to the level. And I'm saying this to my sister, and I'm saying it to my brethren, that when we speak of decolonization, when we speak of African futurism, let us rewrite our narrative in a manner that we are at the center and that we strengthen ourselves universally, yeah? We talk about how do you investigate, because this was the other part that I put in this abstract, which I may not have time to explicate, but I'm very open for any kind of questions. So whether people want to say that they're free, maroon, enslaved, because you had some maroons that actually stayed in the plantation to make sure that they protected those that were still there. They would know where to go into the countryside. But they were so strategic. They were such serious warriors. You understand? That they were able to come in a plantation, look like they walk in just like everybody else, and still go away and establish strategic measures so that the future did not result in everyone being maimed, raped, tortured, and outright murdered. So there wasn't the annihilation that they intended. This is also a time where we begin to reclaim our endangered spaces, right? So when we speak of Afrofuturism, we're talking about how do you begin to undo the way that they present who we are, what we represent, how we sit in our spaces, how do we stay close to making sure that we can maximize our culture, healing, arts, technology, and spirituality for millennia. When they plan, let me make sure I clarify that so it's not seen as a generalization. When persons that are not from the original ancestral ancient African space want to interfere with our sovereign space, want to interfere with our sovereign resilience, want to interfere with how we are presented, how we're actually livicated in the future, they will undo everything that we do well, from education, and have us using models that do not serve us well. Dealing with health and wellness, we just heard the previous scholar, Dr. Knife, clarify. People are eating plastic. So we're not just drinking from a plastic bottle anymore. People are eating plastic rice, plastic vegetables, plastic fruit, et cetera, yeah? So the wellness is really at the center of some of this African futurism experience. One of my second to last points is around how do we shift how we tell our griot traditions. When we speak of griot, we're not just talking about only a storyteller and not just folklore. We're speaking of those persons that recognize they go from mouth to ear. They speak with elders and they carry that knowledge, those narratives very clearly. It's a mnemonic system, a form of memorizing to the point that we highlight all the balances of what we know in an ancestral principle as Ma'at: truth, justice, order, reciprocity, balance, divine righteousness, and harmony. So we're speaking of free, ancestral, ancient, original, indigenous Africans that livicate through this Maronage experience. We talk about liberation, unification, decolonization, self-determination, all these things, reparatory justice. When people think that reparations is only about money, and I definitely agree with that there, this is not about fiat dollars. If our people were to get $100 trillion right now, many of the industries that we already support would be wealthy again. We're talking about resource. I'd like it to be for the next 20 generations, me not have to pay certain fees. I want my land back. Land sovereign. When you saying you sovereign, you have to have some land. When you say you sovereign, you holding on to your ancestral culture, not the culture that they gave you, not even the religion that they gave you. Are you going to hold on to? I'm saying this in the context of not offending anyone that is either a Judaist, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, or Muslim. I'm saying that we have to be able to go back to the future. See where I'm going? So when we say African futurism, we're speaking of going back to bring it forward. Thank you. In regard to how we are able to use spiritual technology. Notice the terms I'm using. Spiritual technology that is transformational, that removes that institutional erasure, that makes governments have permission to make people invisible, whether they have a treaty, hint, subtle, subtle, whether they have an arrangement, hint, subtle, subtle, whether they have a land deed, hint, subtle, subtle, right? Whether they have roles to play in educational spaces. And I'm saying these things from a place of intellectual artivism. We speak of academics sometimes and think that we, as academics, may actually be the ones that know, when in actuality, that's why we have to still do research. because we're still learning. And where the knowledge shifts to wisdom and wise counsel is when we come to the people, when we come to the feet of elders, when we come to the feet of eldresses, when we come to those spaces that are holding on to their sovereignty, holding on to their cooperative work projects, holding on beyond what we may see in the African Union, ECOSOC, the African Union CEDAW, CARICOM Reparations Commission, Caribbean Pan-African Network, Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. You see where I'm going? There's a lots of organizations that are doing things, whether it's the Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League, Rehabilitating Committee 2020, and all of its iterations, whether it's the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And I'm saying these organizational names because I've either been cadre, worked in, navigated, shifted through most of them. And in order for us to do this work around sovereign resilience and being able to speak of our maroon communities throughout the Caribbean, we have to be open. We have to be willing to heal. And when I'm saying healing, I'm speaking of heritage education, arts legacy. Spell it out for me. Heritage education and arts legacy. That's the type of healing that we need to move in that vibration towards, so that way we're able to recognize that freedom, and I quote from one of my eldresses, Claudette Adjua Young Hines, one of the formulators of Succeed, preserving the maroon sanctuary lands in a space of St. Croix. How many people knew that there was a maroon sanctuary space in St. Croix, Virgin Islands? Say what I'm saying? We don't share our information. And we're talking about maroons that shut down the Danish West Indies situation from the 1730s coming forward, led by women and men from out through the Caribbean, Africa, Central America, South America, and the 48 contiguous. Well, it wasn't the 48 then, the 13, whatever it was called back then. Yeah? I think it's important that we begin to share that so that freedom, a word, a condition that resonates throughout humanity. The pains and hardships of chattel slavery are too well known. The trials and triumphs of the Underground Railroad in the continental United States inspired songs and stories over the generations. Throughout the Caribbean, there are anecdotes and snippets of documentation of countless incidents of enslaved Africans' fight and flight for freedom. So when we speak of marronage, when we're speaking of that, we're speaking of the importance of looking at the maroon legacy as a very epic moment in history that paid tribute to the interests of Africans here in Jamaica, in the space where I reside in St. Croix, St. Vincent Grenadines, Trinidad, Tobago, Suriname, Antigua, Barbuda, Puerto Rico, República Dominicana, Haiti. I would like for us to be clear on where I'm going so that we can begin to have these discussions that have actionable deliverables. If you didn't get anything else that I said today, actionable deliverables that allow for us to shift constitutional activities wherever we reside. Keep us in a space of sovereign empowerment so that that resilience is permanent and ongoing. And keeping us in a space where we no longer accept the analysis, the framework, the ideology, or the educational platforms of the colonizer to decolonize ourselves. Yeah. So I think that I will close with my final point on being an Afrofuturist. That's why I started earlier. I asked about persons that, whether it's Star Trek, Star Wars, anything in between, Avatar. These are things that come out of our African experience. I don't know how people looked at Avatar, the movie, but those people were showing us exactly what has happened for resilience amongst maroon, indigenous, original people. That does not stop. Because land sovereignty, yes, spiritual harmony unifies us, and culture heals all the manners in which we can move forward through language, power, and authority. So I greet you in the way that I started, Bayete, royal greetings, and I will say a short prayer to just keep it so that I hope I have not said anything to shift anyone. Amasu and Panter, Sa Uksu Emirhra and Panter, Aura Maketi Pahirura. And I say it in the meta nature primarily because Sometimes when I say it in English, people are like, oh, I say that prayer all the time. We give thanks and praise to the one most high. We live each day daily for the one most divine, and we shall do it tomorrow, just as we do it today. With that, I say, Dua Wantar, give thanks. Medasepa Bayete.
You were so good. Don't move. Dr. Shenzira. Can I get another round of applause for her, please? Wonderful. I want to say Medasi. Listen, today and our conference is targeted to empower people. And this is what we've been getting all day. And this is what you are to expect when you come to the Charleston Maroon International Conference and Festival, to be filled, to be empowered, to go out and conquer, retake, reclaim. And that is what we are about. Now, I would like to find out if you have any questions.
Thank you for sharing. My question is, could you elaborate more on the concept of spiritual technology and the role that it plays in sovereignty?
First and foremost, thank you for that question, because that would actually be like another series of lectures as well as a workshop. Because to understand the spiritual technology, essentially, you heard me speak of Ma'at. So I speak of Ma'at Chihuti Sashait. So we're talking about divine intelligence, which is another layer of how we use spirituality and again, not the religious realm, because that's very personal, of course, but where we're actually looking at our spirit, our soul, our being. We speak of the higher consciousness as well as the consciousness that is more earth based. People will speak of the Kedisheta or the Herisheta in that regard. Spiritual technology allows for us to go beyond just this physical flesh. It allows for us to pray together in a common space and not PREY on one another, but PRAY communing together. It also was facilitated by us dealing with healing. You may have heard me say chats for life, so I'll explain what that means in regard to your question. Cultural heritage through the arts and technology are spiritual. What has happened is that we have allowed an external force to strip the spirituality out of almost everything that we do. They try to call it a divisiveness between the sacred and the secular. We forget to invoke our ancestors when we come together. And when I say invoke ancestors and giving offerings, people take that to a very dark space, rephrase, to a very other than positive space. No one says anything when certain royals bring animals to an offering space. No one says anything when people hold shrines and use frankincense and myrrh when they're dealing with funerary rites. So when I speak of spiritual technologies, I'm speaking of it in the context of how do we begin to shift what we do in body, mind, soul, spirit, and consciousness so that it brings us together like one all the time, even when we have differences. Because you know, in family, you have like big fight. But at the end of the day, when our parents and grandparents say, come, it's time for supper, we better be at that table and eating together, even if you vex and you don't go sleep vex, to the best of our ability. But again, without spiritual technologies, without us continuing to engage with ancestral work, without us continuing to engage in meditative practices to deal with wellness. You can't eat flesh all day. I'm not trying to talk about people that are not vegan, forgive me. But if you only do that and don't fast occasionally to let your body's spirit get itself into its feeling spirit, into its soul spirit, then the spiritual technologies will not be functional, right? We have no problem talking about artificial intelligence, but what about spiritual intelligence? Right. I hope I answered to a point. Keep playing. They want you to be on the mic. They can't hear you in the area.
Hi. Yes, thank you. Yes, you did answer my question. And I just wanted to give some context that I'm in the beginning stages of what happened? My art?
It's the spiritual technology. There we go.
To writing a series based on Afrofuturism.
Beautiful.
The context is an alternate past that would inform then an alternate future. So that's why I'm very curious about spiritual technology, because I want to explore different themes around our culture or spirituality, and just our people in general. So where can I find more information or sources?
I would encourage you to email me at askspeaks@gmail. And then that way I can just send you some of the annotated bibliographies that we have on Afrofuturism. And I'll actually just share with you the rest of the paper that I didn't read today. Right? That way you would have some information. I don't know. She's go.
You remember?
We're good.
Okay, so do we have any more questions?
Really? I answered everything? Okay. I don't think I answered everything.
Don't worry, we do have your email. It's
Right, well-
astspeaks@gmail.com.
Right. I just wanted to clarify in regard to your question as well that there are a number of different organizations that are involved in these things. So it may be well worth to look at the ones that I was listing as well. There's a lot of things around Afrofuturism or just changing the narrative and using our griot consciousness. As quiet as it's kept, even inside of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, because there's a thread around indigeneity and around technology that speaks to that. So I think it's important to look at the CARICOM, well, the CRC, as well as the IDO, which is the Atacare International Development Organization. And you can just go to IDO network.org. No, .org. Yes, idlenetwork.org, because then you'll get to see what traditional African kingdoms and realms are engaged in. And then there's several things that are done by the World Beat Center, right? So some of the work that I do is as an ambassador for IDO, but particularly the World Beat Center, while it's physically located in San Diego, California, they have their reach around the globe, and they have been central to the African futurist movement since the 1960s. So I think it's really important to know that, while you may hear in the academic space that this concept came forward in the 1990s, that African people, ancestral ancient African people have been involved in futuristic spiritual technologies for centuries, if not millennia. So it's AIDO. Yes. But I want to thank everyone for just their patience. And if you have any other questions, just approach us when we're done, yeah? Okay, give thanks.
Medasi, thank you, Dr. Chenzira. And we're moving on to our last panelist. And then after this, we will be having a play, a short excerpts from Echoes in the Bones. However, before we move on with Dr. Fox, for the play, we cannot have any streaming at all because there's no copyright. So after this, I'm going to ask you to end all streaming and videoing. All right? But Dr. Diana Fox, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Aquaba, Mabrika. Wow, those were some incredible talks to follow. They're setting quite a tall path to reach. Let me just open up my computer here. It is an enormous honor and a pleasure for me to be here with you today. I do have are you going to pull up the PowerPoint? Okay, I have a PowerPoint because I want to show some images. But I want to start off by, well, everyone's leaving. The title of my talk is The Spirit of Marronage, Six Pillars of the United Maroon Indigenous. And you've heard reference to them earlier today in various talks. You've also heard the concept of the spirit of marronage mentioned a few times. And when I get to talking about the six pillars, the ideas that are embedded in there are concepts that you've heard throughout the day. So I think that they will resonate. I speak to you in two capacities. I am the University Director of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies in the regional headquarters. And that's important because my second hat that I speak to you from is as an academic advisor to the United Maroon Indigenous Peoples. And what that means as an academic advisor since 2017 is that I use my position in the university to try to transform the university into a more welcoming and accessible space for Indigenous peoples. The University of the West Indies here in the Mona campus is a former plantation. There's an African burial ground. I've been trying to get the university to have a land acknowledgement. We all speak from the ancestral lands of the first peoples, and it is important to recognize from where we stand. Using the resources of the university as a platform to amplify the voices of Indigenous peoples is something I've worked very hard to do. In 2021, along with the office that Vereen Shepherd is soon to be demitting, the Office of Reparations Research, we invited the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to come to Jamaica to make a tour of Indigenous communities. We were here. Maroons from 15 different countries were here talking and learning with one another. We have also started an Indigenous research cluster that is rooted in collaboration from the very beginning with Indigenous peoples. It's a UE-wide, region-wide. All Indigenous peoples of the region are invited to be part of it. So let me move on now, just having provided that context for you so you know where I'm coming from in sharing about these six pillars. Today, I have three goals in my presentation. The first is to talk to you about what is the UMIP? What is this in United Maroon Indigenous Peoples? What are the six pillars of unity? Because together they unification of across the region, and the relationship of the pillars to land as an economic resource. So you see here, there's this little icon of money, and we've heard that money is a fabrication, it's an imaginary construct. We've heard that economic resources must be in line with people's true values. And I want to explain how employing the six pillars can provide an important foundation for averting the dangers of destructive development, so many of which have harmed Indigenous communities, including those Indigenous communities who have advocated for their rights, such as the Saramaka in Suriname, whom Vereen Shepherd spoke about, who won this important case, yet their lands continue to be mined, their forests continue to be logged. The Suriname government is ignoring the ruling. And so it is crucially important to talk about how to build a movement to resist the forces of destruction of the land that is even recognized legally as under the sovereignty of Indigenous Maroons. So before I move on to tell you what the UMIP is, I want you to reflect a bit. Oh, can you move to the next slide? Thanks. I'm not sure if you can see the image in the next slide. Probably I'll describe it to you. It's a little bit dark. But I want you to reflect on a question as I speak. How do the six pillars that I'm going to describe to you sustain the spirit of marronage such that the spirituality and the philosophy as land as being, land as the totality of the living Mother Earth, are not reduced to mere commodity, stripped of the essence of spirit when we consider land as an economic resource. How can land be considered an economic resource and still sustain the spirituality of the living earth? Put another way, how is it possible to make a living from the land without destroying the spirit of marronage, a spirit that unites the ancestors with the living and which is a foundational quality of indigeneity? What you see here in that small picture is a gathering of the United Maroons Indigenous peoples in Dominica in the market square in Roseau. There was a ritual there that we held to the ancestors, Maroon ancestors who lost their lives, who were captured in their quest for freedom and hung in that market square. That square, a market for economic transactions, should be a shrine. And so we made it a shrine. We brought these items, these fruits of the land. We sang, and you can see the shek there, to summon the ancestors, to give praise and thanks for those who sacrificed on whose shoulders and spirit the movement continues today. So that's one small action that has been taken by the UMIP. What is the UMIP? The UMIP, United Maroon Indigenous Peoples. It's a women-led and created movement, although there are certainly men involved. But going back to what Mama G talked about earlier, I was thinking about why is it a women-led movement? Well, women are very good at organizing. You know, we have a lot to manage in the household with our children, in our work lives, with sustaining the values of our communities. And the women who have led this movement carry with them the spirit of the Divine Mother. And they have sought to bring Maroons together across the diaspora. And I'm thinking of the Maroons here in St. Croix and other places who are not yet part of this to join. But they've sought to bring people together, answering the call of the ancestors. That is their motto. We're answering the call of the ancestors to learn from one another, share traditions, revive languages and culture, including the idea of what it means to be a free Maroon. What does it mean to be free? This is a question that that you, Mike Lemson, yourself have articulated. What does it mean to be a free living Maroon today? In Jamaica, and yes, in Jamaica, but the United Maroon Indigenous peoples ask this question for all of the spaces that they inhabit. They want to be recognized as Indigenous beyond their own personal recognition of indigeneity, to harness international human rights instruments to empower and uplift communities by realizing their rights. The UMIP consists of a network of Indigenous Maroon individuals of varying Maroon ethnic origins, their allies, and Maroon rights organizations. Examples: First Peoples comrades such as the Yamé Hummingbird Taino people here in Jamaica, some members of the Kalinago of Dominica, the Santa Rosa First Peoples of Trinidad, members of the Garifuna Nation, members of various Rastafari sects, Orisha practitioners, and a growing list of grassroots actors and their supporters from academia and nonprofit organizations. When we think about how does change take place, it takes place at multiple levels, from within the community, within our homes, beyond in civil society, through local governments, national governments, and at the level of the global community. And the United Maroons Indigenous people are trying to harness and bring together all of these different levels to work collaboratively and then to go off in their own spaces and continue the work in their communities. So I don't know if you can see the picture. Oh, the next one. Next, please. Oh, sorry, I skipped over that one. Yeah. So what you see there, in very faded, is an image of Ia Akila Jaramogi, whom Gama Mamaji mentioned earlier. And Ia is a spiritual leader of the Orisha. You see Her Excellency, the Honorable Grand Galan, Fidelia Grand Galan, who's an ambassador to the government of Ghana, and she's an ambassador. I'm sorry, I'm bungling her long and important title. Her Excellency, the Honorable Fidelia Grand Galan, who is an ambassador from Suriname in Ghana, and Gama Mamanji there. And what they are doing is they're signing in 2017 in a Surinamese Maroon community the Declaration of Unity that they have crafted, which now has taken on various new iterations. I traveled with them as a member of this team, as their academic advisor. And before that, starting in 2014, and I don't have time to go through the whole history of their organizing, but it was Fidelia herself who reached out to Gama Mamaji and then Cohen Callender of the American Maroons of Trinidad and Tobago, and later Akila came on board to sign the Memorandum of Cooperation for Maroon Women and Communities of the Hemisphere. And there they signed it. It was Suriname, Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, the first three countries that were part of the Maroon Indigenous peoples. Then there was a memorandum of cooperation that was later signed with the Maroon Women's Network and the Americans of Trinidad and Tobago. And there have been continued declarations and signing of commitments to work together. And one of the ways that they have worked together is to organize events such as the first Maroon gathering and academic conference in Dominica, where that first picture was taken. We are now organizing a second gathering that will take place in November in Trinidad in the forestry community of Akila. She is an example of how she has brought resources out of the land. She has turned a degraded forest where there was a dearth of water into a thriving forest, planting over 100,000 trees, creating an eco-jewelry line, training indigenous foresters to fight the fires that have been breaking out as the result of climate emergency. And the land is a spiritual space with Orisha shrines, and the two are woven together. The land as economic resource, the land as a spiritual inspiration, the land as a teacher to children who come there in groups from schools to be reconnected to their roots. So gatherings have brought together Maroons from across the region, and not only self-organized conferences, but to go to the United Nations Permanent Forum on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, to go to the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. At the UN Permanent Forum on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Akila and other Maroon women were told that this is not the space that they should be. They should be in the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. There was the coloniality of the UN trying to push them into a particular space, and they said, no, we are both. We are indigenous Africans in the Caribbean. So they are working to decolonize the UN space, right, by just showing up. Yes, it's 2 minutes, but you can also submit your human rights violations to the High Commission on Human Rights. And as an academic advisor with the academic team, we have worked together to put together these papers that we have submitted to the High Commission on Human Rights, demonstrating how land is being encroached on across Maroon communities, whether it's by corporate investors or capitalist extractors. And if you Google United Maroon Indigenous Peoples United Nations, one of the first things that comes up is the submission that we made to the UN High Commission of Human Rights. What that means is, in this system, is that now Maroons can take their governments to court. They are recognized as participants in the UN Permanent Forum. So now the other important aspect is, no matter how skeptical we might be of the UN, and I think that it's done some wonderful things and some problematic things, these gatherings have brought Maroons together. We stayed in a house together. Whenever we go to these spaces, whether it's New York or Geneva, we often stay together, connect with one another, and deepen knowledge of our of shared tradition. Look, I'm saying "our," and I'm an ally. This is how seriously I take the work. Okay, now that you know what the UMIP is as a collection of Maroons from around the region, and NGOs and activists and allies and academia, let me now move to the principles. The next slide. You probably can't see that clearly. I don't have time to go into very much detail in all of them, but I want to share what they are. The first one, the foundational principle, is kapale. Kapale is, now I should say that all of these principles, kapale, ambangi, uhuru, gayap, ujima, and livity, are Afrocentric and indigenous concepts. They were concepts that were decided on by a group of organizers of the UMIP who wanted to find concepts that elevated the principles of what they said is the spirit of marriage. So kapale refers to African diasporic spiritual citizenship and traditional spirituality. And I'll go into a little more detail about that. It's a Yoruba concept, a modification of the word pale, a spiritual space similar to a shrine, a place of prayer and offerings to deities and ancestors. It's the spiritual foundation of the UMIP. Everything that they do is undergirded by their spiritual foundation, the call from the ancestors, and their connection to themselves and Mother Earth. It's founded on these principles. Now, the concept of spiritual citizenship is an interesting one that's embodied in Kapale. The anthropologist and Orisha practitioner Fadake Castor coined the term spiritual citizenship as a concept of a community connected by spiritual values, a sense of collective responsibility to each other and their land. We tend to think of citizenship as a concept of government, but it is not only a concept of government. Citizenship weaves us together in community for common purpose. So Kapale embodies this concept of spiritual citizenship. Going back to the other pillars, Mbangi, a gathering space to learn from one another. I'm going to go into a little more detail about this as well. The idea of Mbangi, gathering to learn from each other. Mbangi is a Bantu word that means house without rooms. It's a convened space where public investigation and discussion of concerns are held. Bantu peoples are an ethno-linguistic grouping that is a cultural language grouping dispersed over 24 countries in Africa, comprised approximately of 400 ethnic groups, speaking over 650 Bantu languages in Africa. Can you imagine? It emerged in West Africa over 3,000 years ago, but the concept of Mbangi has found its way into Caribbean spaces, which means that it was carried in the minds and hearts as an indigenous political institution of Africa on the journeys, those horrific slave journeys. It was carried and sustained. That is the way that the concept of Mbangi finds its way in Caribbean communities. It connotes the coming together of a community to dig up conscientiously and to address the problems and challenges that the community in question is faced with in a humane, caring, and loving manner. An Mbangi is a learning place where people collectively resolve a community's problems. The Mbangi assemblies are designed to plead a case and to critique and clarify important social issues. As an indigenous political institution of Africa, its core values pertain to the art of leading or guiding community policy. Strategically, Mbangi was built in a particular architectural style of simplicity with open walls to camouflage its powerful political role during the colonial epoch as a space where many political plots against agents of colonization were organized from the inside. So it's a political institution that is being revived through the United Maroon Indigenous peoples. And when they gather together in community, guided by the spirit in Kapale, they seek to solve problems collectively in a healing space, bringing forth also this historic Indigenous institution and reviving it. Other concepts, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'll go through them a little more quickly. The concept of uhuru, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which they define freedom, sovereignty, reparations, and survivance. Survivance. We heard about the limitations of the concept of resilience that is becoming an overused word. Survivance is a term that was coined by the North American Indigenous writer Gerald Visner, who's an Anishinaabe person, to combine survival and resilience and to insist on native presence. That is, to resist the concept of the disappearance, the extinction narratives, and the ongoing invisibilization of Indigenous peoples. Survivance is the ongoing presence through survival and resilience combined. Gayap is a term from Trinidad. It was originally a Carib word, so probably it comes from what we now call South America. Working together for positive cause, sovereignty for food, land, and water. That's what Gayap represents for the United Maroon Indigenous peoples, who organize Gayaps, bring the community together to plant trees, to plant food, to strive toward the food sovereignty we heard about earlier, and through planting trees to revive and regenerate the rivers, the water table, to bring back the hydro cycle. Ujima, collective work and responsibility, different from Gayap in that it is the responsibility of the elders to educate the youth. In curriculum, there's a Maroon curriculum that has been created by Gama Mamaji and Akila Jaramogi that is in a book that is forthcoming that I've co-edited that can hopefully be used as a map, a roadmap for how these Maroon concepts and Maroon ways of life can be incorporated into curriculum to teach the young. And last, of course, is Livity, which you know is a Rastafari concept, actualizing Maroon cultural norms and values. Really, these operate together, interconnected in a circle. They feed off of one another. They mutually reinforce one another. So these are the 6 pillars that guide this collectivity of Maroon peoples from across the region. Now, I talked about the dangers. What happens when the spirit of marronage is abandoned? Next slide, yeah. And I want to just give you some examples of the problems. You know them all, but I'll just highlight them. Problems Indigenous peoples face in ecological crises, social injustices, and gender-based violence. Of course, there's the destruction of the earth, unfettered development without free, prior, and informed consent, poses a challenge to sustainable climate justice efforts and Indigenous life ways. Unsustainable tourism and development, right? This is why cultural heritage tourism is so important. It's so important to combine it with ecological tourism and to ensure that these values are part of the tourism practice. We know that many hotels pump raw sewage into the sea, and they're involved with extractive industries, hardwoods, gold, oil, destruction of mangroves, with obviously deleterious consequences of biodiversity loss that impact on mostly indigenous livelihoods. Marginalizing of women. Despite the enormous assets and contributions to society, Indigenous women suffer from the triple discrimination of being women, being poor, and being Indigenous. Now, this isn't obviously all Indigenous peoples are women, but throughout Indigenous communities, these are indicators that have been measured. And as well, issues of trafficking, lack of access to ancestral lands. Those are some of the challenges that unfold these very problematic practices when the principles of the spirit of marronage are abandoned. When they are actualized, and you can't really, next slide, please. You can't really see it that clearly, but here we are in the Kalinago territory in Dominica. We have Maroons from at least 5 different countries here. I'm here. We've gathered together after an opening smoke ceremony, acknowledging the Kalinago as the first peoples, talking about how to build solidarity across Indigenous groups, the role of academia, the role of allies, the role of NGOs. We have to talk about these things. We can't assume what solidarity looks like. We have to build solidarity across our differences. So I'll close with that. Thank you so much. It's been an honor. Questions? Anybody have any questions, comments, questions? No? Guess not? No? Okay. That's fine.
Okay, so I want to thank Dr. Diana Fox. Please step back to the podium, Dr. Fox, for such a powerful and enlightening presentation. The topics that she touched on, the areas, it was deep. And she has done the research and has uncovered a number of things that we have to be aware of. And as females, I see a lot of females here, she did touch on a very important point as well. It's important. Dr. Fox?
Uh, Dr. Fox, greetings, yeah. Breadlocks, Yaad Radio, you know. You're over there. We give thanks. The presentation was eye-opening, just in terms of knowing that there is somebody speaking on the rights, you know, from an academics point of view, because it is this research that will change these laws, you know. Specifically in Jamaica here, land, but also the indigenous rights of Rastafari and the usage of herb, you know. So I hope to see you probably in the future connecting more with the Rastafari community to champion also that cause, because even recently we see the laws in Jamaica being amended, but Rastafaris are still being arrested and persecuted, you know. The hair of our children is being cut. They are not being accepted in schools because of vaccines or whatever it is. So again, give thanks that the work that you're doing, but hopefully we are going to meet in the future for the Rastafari community
Yes.
also. So,
Well, I'd like. Thank you for that, and it's important that you do know that the Rastafari have been part of this movement. Akila Jaramogi is also Rastafari. When we were here in Charlestown with the Special Rapporteur, we went to Mama Faya's Indigenous Foundation and had a reasoning there. And it was the first time in Jamaica that all of the sects of Rastafari met together in Jamaica. And we were working with Prophet Greg and others. And so, yes, it's very important as this understanding of indigeneity is pushed and challenged beyond its initial association. Well, I don't want to step on any feet here, but in many places, indigeneity and First Peoples are considered the same thing. And First Peoples are always indigenous, but there are also indigenous peoples who have sustained their indigeneity from other parts of the world. And that's what this movement is trying to help recognize.
I have a question at the back for you, Dr. Fox.
So, Dr. Fox, Marsha Hall from the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica. So we know that there are non-Indigenous people and organizations, researchers, filmmakers who are actively working or engaged with Indigenous knowledge and intellectual property issues. What type of measures are in place to combat against exploitation against Maroon and Indigenous people communities? Thanks.
Thank you for that question. Well, at the university, you know that we have anyone who does any research within communities has to submit their research through an ethics board. But we are seeing that that is not enough when you're working with Indigenous peoples. One of the projects that is currently underway at my institute is a project that is funded by the Caribbean Development Bank, which is a study of six Indigenous six Indigenous spaces across the region. And as part of that work, we crafted a document that outlines ethical guidelines for collaborating with Indigenous peoples. What we're doing now is we're taking that document for the bank and converting it to function in the university space. So the Indigenous Studies Cluster is going to be founded on principles of free, prior, and informed consent that are foundational in the UNDRIP, right, to working with Indigenous peoples. So anyone who participates, we can't necessarily control things everywhere, but we can regulate, help to set standards in the spaces in which we occupy, where we move. So the Indigenous Studies Research Cluster will begin these conversations that hopefully will scale up to a particular ethics submission when working with Indigenous peoples of the region.
Wonderful, wonderful. Do we have any other questions? Do we have any questions online? Anyone? All right, so that is a wrap. I want to say a very big thank you to our second panelist. Come on, man, you guys can do better than that. Woo! Wonderful. And we are on to the next segment. Remember, stop recording. We are on to the next segment, and this is where we have, yes, I'm asking